Mountains loom pretty large in fantasy. They're the spines of continents, the bones of the world. Sometimes they're characters, sometimes they're opponents, sometimes they're part of the magic system. But before you can use mountains in your world building and in your story, it helps to understand what they are and how they got here, both in the real world and in fantasy. And that's what I want to talk about today, mountains and how to use them. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time World Building with your host, Marie Mullaney. Do you like my use of my screen over here? This is an image drawn for my video about world building like George R.R. Martin. It is from Poppy Seeds, who is on TikTok. I'll leave a link to her down below so you can check out their work and so on TikTok. And if you would like to have a featured spot here and to draw images that I use, like that I display here and mention, then please join my Discord server and I will be asking for thumbnail images or art like this to show here. And thank you very much to Poppy Seeds, as I said, link down below. Let's kick things off with how mountains actually form and the different types you can have in your world. There's a lot to cover here, so to keep things manageable, we're going to break it down into sections. First up, we'll talk about plate tectonics and the two major types of mountains it can create. Then we'll look at another two ways mountains can form, even on worlds without plate tectonics. So stick around for that. But before we dive in, if you could give this video a like, I'd really appreciate it. It helps feed the algorithm gods and keeps the channel growing. First, let's just make sure we're on the same plate about what plate tectonics is. The surface of the Earth isn't a single solid shell. It's broken into these massive slabs or crusts called tectonic plates, and they're all very slowly drifting around on top of the molten mantle like pieces of a cracked shell on an egg. Now, when you have two of these plates grind into each other, especially when both are continental crusts, you get a process called crustal shortening. Basically, the plates crumple and thicken, pushing the land upward, just like a rug bunching up when it's shoved against the wall. This creates what's known as fold mountains, massive ranges like the Himalayas, which were formed when the Indian subcontinent smacked into the Eurasian plate. This process is called uplift, and it's what gives us some of the tallest peaks on Earth. In fact, Mount Everest, currently the tallest above sea level mountain, was born this way, and it's still growing. At least it's sort of growing. And I say it's sort of growing, because here's the thing, I was last week old when I learned. Mountains can't just keep growing forever. Gravity eventually throws a tantrum and cuts them down to size. See, the taller a mountain gets, the heavier it becomes, and that weight pushes down on the crust beneath it, causing it to sag. Think back to that eggshell, right? It's like the shell is denting into the meat. And if it dents too much, the weight can overpower the tectonic forces pushing the mountain upward. Then the uplift stops as the pieces of the crust keep pushing together, and the pressure leads to shortening and thickening under lower peaks instead, which often causes the slopes on either side of the central peak to rise. So when mountains can't grow upward anymore, they tend to expand outward. But gravity isn't the only limit on mountains. The constant work of erosion, wind, rain, ice, and especially glaciers also grind away at the mountain's flanks and summits. Geologists even have a name for this icy haircut. They call it the glacial buzzsaw, which is honestly just based. It's the idea that once a mountain rises high enough for permanent ice and glaciers to form, that ice starts to carve it back down faster than tectonic forces can push it up. It's like a magical ceiling made of slow grinding ice. So, between the sheer mass of the mountains themselves and the relentless effects of erosion, Earth's peaks tend to top out around the same height, about 1,500 meters above the snow line for most ranges, with Everest sitting near the upper limit. Okay, so that's fold mountains caused by plate tectonics and their height limit. But I promised you another tectonic one, so let's crack on. And tectonic mountain number 2 is volcanoes. Unlike the slow grind of fold mountains, volcanic mountains are built from the floor up, formed when molten rock or magma escapes from beneath the Earth's crust and erupts onto the surface. Every eruption piles up a bit more rock, layer by layer, until you've got a fully fledged volcanic mountain. It's kind of like Earth as a teenager, volcanoes are zits, and Earth doesn't wash its face. I mean, that's a bit grim, but volcanic mountains do tend to be real pretty, so maybe Earth's zits works differently from ours. The most famous example is probably Mauna Kea, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, in Hawaii. It's actually taller than Everest if you measure it from its base on the sea floor to its peak, but most of its height is underwater, so Everest gets the glory. Volcanic mountains form in a couple of different tectonic scenarios. One common one is subduction zones, where the oceanic plate gets pushed underneath a continental plate. As the subducted plate sinks into the mantle, it melts, and the resulting magma rises up, eventually erupting to form a mountain. That's how you get fiery ranges in fold mountains like the Andes. But here's a fun bit. Not all volcanoes need a plate boundary. Some volcanic mountains form over something called a mantle plume, a sort of hotspot of rising magma deep within the Earth. When the plume punches through the crust, it creates a volcano, even if it's in the middle of a tectonic plate. That's how the Hawaiian Islands formed. But tectonic plates don't stand still, as we've discussed. Over millions of years, they drift, and when a plate moves off the plume, the volcano stops receiving magma and goes dormant. Meanwhile, a new volcano starts forming over the hotspot. It's like a slow-moving lava conveyor belt, leaving a trail of volcanic islands, or mountains, behind it. And just like with uplifted mountains, volcanic peaks eventually do reach a point where gravity and erosion start to win. As the mountain gets taller, its weight presses down the crust and causes it to sag. Mauna Kea and its neighbor Mauna Loa have actually depressed the seafloor beneath them by several kilometers. That's a lot of mass to carry around. But volcanoes do have a cheat code: speed. Their eruptions can build up mountains faster than erosion can tear them down, at least for a while. It's a bit of a race between geological forces, but eventually erosion wins. Okay, so that's tectonic mountain number 2, volcanoes, born of fire, powered by deep earth pressure, and often tracking the quiet march of time through moving plates and long-cooled magma trails. Now, let's look at a different kind of mountain, where Earth blows bubbles. Most mountains are made by either smashing plates together or spewing lava skyward, but not all of them. Some mountains rise without any plate collisions or volcanic activity at all. For example, the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. Hope I got that one right. At first glance, they look like your standard old range of mountains. Rugged peaks, ancient rocks, forested slopes, all the normal features. But geologically, they're a bit of an oddball. These mountains weren't formed by tectonic collisions or magma from a hotspot. In fact, the rock that makes up the Adirondacks is over 1 billion years old. But the mountains themselves are only about 5 million years old. So how in the heck did that happen? It turns out that the Adirondacks are part of a geological uplift dome, meaning the crust beneath them is literally bubbling up from below, like Earth decided to puff out a slow-motion souffle. Everyone loves souffle. There's no subduction zone, no active volcano. Instead, scientists think the uplift is caused by a combination of heat and buoyant material deep inside the mantle. Roughly 100 kilometers beneath the surface, there's a layer of light, low-density rock. That material is slowly rising through the denser mantle and pushing the crust upward as it goes. Another theory is that the heat itself is causing the crust to expand and lift, helping to form those dome-shaped mountains. And it's not just a one-time thing. The Adirondacks are still rising today at a rate of 2 to 3 millimeters per year. Doesn't sound like much, but over time it adds up. What's especially fascinating is how this new mountain range is made up of old rocks. The tops of the Adirondacks are made of I picked a whole lot of words here. The tops of the Adirondacks are made of anorthosite. Some chemist is having a heart attack. Anorthosite, a rare igneous rock that forms deep underground. And, fun fact, it's the same kind of rock found on the lunar highlands. So yeah, the Adirondacks are made out of moon rocks. Kinda. Over millions of years, erosion has stripped away the softer surface layers, revealing the ancient rock beneath. It's like mountain upcycling. Take some ancient core, give it a gentle push upwards, and voila, you have a brand new peak. So if your fantasy world doesn't have plate tectonics, or you just want a mountain range that feels weird or magical, this kind of mantle-driven uplift is a great alternative. You can have ancient mountains reawaken, continents with slowly inflating domes, or highlands that just quietly rise. Heck, some of it can even be magical. But we're not quite done yet, because mountains can also come from the stars. When a rock from space slams into a planet at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour, it tends to leave a mark we call the impact crater. Now, when you hear crater, you probably picture a hole in the ground, and you're not wrong. But big impacts don't just dig craters. They also make mountains through a process called central uplift. What happens is the force of the collision is so intense that the crust behaves like liquid for just a moment. The ground at the impact site collapses under the pressure and then rebounds upward, splashing back in solid rock, like a drop of water shooting to the sky when you throw a rock into a quiet pool. But because it is rock, that rebound freezes in place and becomes a peak or a peak ring in the center of the crater. So yeah, sometimes a mountain is actually the aftershock of cosmic violence. Hurt stars make hurt planets. We have a few of these central uplifts here on Earth, though erosion has often hidden or worn them down over time. But on other planets and moons, these things are everywhere. Take Rhea Silva, a mountain inside a giant impact crater on the asteroid Vesta. It stands over 22 kilometers high, almost 3 times the height of Everest, and the asteroid's only 500 kilometers wide. It is absurdly tall. Or look at Mercury, where a massive impact crater formed the Calorus Basin. On the exact opposite side of the planet, the antipode, the seismic shock waves converged and deformed the crust, creating a strange rumpled mountain range. The mountain formed on the other side of the planet due to the impact of an asteroid. Now, how does all this help your world building? Well, if you want a mountain range that feels dramatic and alien, or if you're designing a world scarred by ancient divine wars or asteroid strikes, impact-generated peaks give you a visual and narrative tool that says, something terrible happened here. It's not just a mountain, it's a memory. A wizard could have smashed a hole in there. You could build an entire culture around a crater peak with myths about fire from the sky, gods of judgment, or a sealed evil slumbering beneath the mountain roots. So next time you're placing your fantasy range, remember, not all mountains rise because of planet zits. Some are forged in fire. Others are the scars of ancient violence, written in stone. Before we dive into the fantasy mountains and how to use them in your actual stories, let me just sneak in a quick plug for my epic fantasy series, Sangwil Chronicles. The series is complete and available everywhere, including audiobooks. It's gotten some really lovely reviews from people other than my sister, I promise. And I've got great feedback on the world building in particular. So if you'd like to see what kind of world I've built, complete with some very dramatic terrain, check out Sangwil Chronicles today. Alrighty, so we've covered how mountains form, whether from grinding plates, fire from below, uplifted rock, or a really bad day with an asteroid. Now, let's talk about what mountains can do in your story. Because in fantasy, a mountain is never just a chunk of rock. It's a challenge, a protector, a threat, a mystery, a power. So let's get into it. Mountains aren't just terrain. They're narrative tools. You can use them to shape the flow of your story, to isolate regions, to create danger, to build mystery, or quite literally to raise the stakes. Let's look at a few classic roles mountains can play in fantasy. First, mountains are fantastic natural walls. They divide countries, cultures, and climates. On one side, you might have green valleys and temperate forests. On the other, a harsh desert shaped by the rain shadow. These divisions are perfect for keeping civilizations apart until a dramatic crossing occurs, creating unique highlands or valley or desert cultures, serving as the border to the forbidden land, enemy territory, or the wilderness beyond. I use my mountain range in Kisangi in this way. The arm of the gods, yes, singular arm, yes, plural gods, creates a barrier on the continent that resulted in very different cultures forming that were only joined in prehistory by the spread of the threesome religion when the Salt Pass opened. In your world building, a mountain range can justify why two kingdoms don't get along, or why a particular region remained undiscovered for centuries. Geography creates politics, and mountains are one of the biggest pieces of geography you can have access to. However, sometimes a mountain isn't just in the way, it is actively fighting back. Let's talk about Tolkien's Caradhras. Caradhras is a mountain in the Fellowship of the Ring. And when the Fellowship tries to cross it, it actively tries to kill them. The wind howls, the snow buries them, avalanches block their path. And while Tolkien doesn't quite come out and say the mountain is alive, it's definitely not friendly. Yeah, Jackson made it that it was Saruman doing this, but in the books, it is just Caradhras being that unfriendly. This isn't just about the weather. This is about the world resisting the characters, showing that even the land is aligned against them. The failed attempt to cross Caradhras drives the Fellowship into the depths of Moria, under the mountain, and a very different kind of danger. So here, the mountain serves two narrative purposes. It's an antagonistic force, and it creates a story decision. Go under or go back. That's the kind of landscape storytelling that adds texture and tension to your plot. But sometimes mountains don't just challenge characters physically. they become spiritual trials, tests of will, or gateways to ancient power. A perfect example of this comes from Tamora Pierce's Lioness Rampant. In the final installment of the Song of the Lioness Quartet, Alana must travel beyond the borders of Tortal, across war-torn lands, and into the icy heights of the Roof of the World. Her goal is to retrieve the Dominion Jewel, a legendary artifact of power guarded by a mountain elemental. The journey itself is brutal. The pass is blocked by blizzards, and the elemental guardian, Chitral, is not about to hand over the jewel for free. Alana has to climb alone, battling the cold, the terrain, and Chitral himself, who takes the form of a massive magical mountain ape. She's wounded, half frozen, and ultimately defeated. But her courage impresses Chitral, who gives her the jewel. This is classic mythic mountain storytelling. The mountain as gatekeeper to divine or magical knowledge that you overcome with strength of spirit, not strength of arms. This is the kind of trial that strips the hero to the core and shows us what it means to be strong inside. And importantly, the magic of the place is tied to the mountain itself. This isn't the power you find in a library, court of wizards. It's not something you can walk away from. It's primal, it's ancient, and it's rooted in the land. This kind of mountain isn't just tall, it's sacred, it's dangerous, and it's an embodiment of those deep forces of the world. So when you're building your own fantasy setting, don't just think of mountains as background scenery. Think of them as mythic stages. Your character doesn't just climb a mountain, they confront it. They might come down changed, or not come down at all. Before we go on to magic, let's just briefly cover two important elements of mountains that I've touched on: people who live on and under them. Now, we often think of mountains as unwelcoming. Steep slopes, thin air, freezing temperatures, all of the bad things. But people do live there, and they do thrive. And that gives us, as storytellers, all kinds of world-building opportunities. Take the Sherpa, for example. These are people who live way up in the Himalayas, around 4,000 meters above sea level. That's high enough to make most of us dizzy just walking across a room. But the Sherpa have adapted over generations. Their lungs are bigger, their blood handles oxygen better, and they've built a culture that's deeply spiritual and community focused. You know them for guiding people up Everest, but they're not just mountaineers, they're mountain people. Or head over to South America, where the Aymara and the Quechua have lived in the Andes for thousands of years. They've carved entire farms into the side of the mountains, building terraces to control water and protect their crops from the wind. Their mountains aren't just landforms, they're gods, the Apis, powerful spirits that protect and punish, depending on how you treat them. And then there are the Amhara in the Ethiopian highlands, who took things a step further and carved entire churches out of rock. These people didn't just build on mountains, they built with them. The mountain was part of their architecture, their defense, their identity. So, what does that mean for your fantasy world? It means highland civilizations don't have to be primitive goat herders on wind-blown peaks, and they don't all have to speak Scottish. They can be deeply spiritual, culturally distinct, technologically adapted to their environment. Maybe they speak a different dialect from valley folk. Maybe they have a unique magical tradition tied to the stars or the thin air or the sacred heights. Maybe they trade in rare mountain herbs, or their proximity to the heavens gives them divine visions. And maybe magic only works properly at a certain altitude. So suddenly those mountaintop cities become vital to the functioning of the fantasy elements of your world. Okay, so that's life on top. Now let's flip it down. Because while some people climb mountains, others dig into them. So let's talk about dwarves first. Now, dwarves get a bit of a trope treatment most of the time. They have underground halls, gruff voices, often Scottish, I don't know why, big beards, axes and ale, and all that. And sure, that works. But you can do so much more with a subterranean culture. Now, I did do a whole series on that, and you can check that out in the information card if you're building a subterranean system. And with that, let's move on from people and talk about how mountains can interact with your magic system. Mountains aren't just giant lumps of rock. They're massive engines of energy, and that energy can be incredibly useful in fantasy world building. So let's start with this. As mountains move, specifically as the tectonic plates beneath them shift, this can release enormous amounts of energy. I mean, that's what earthquakes are, right? That's what drives volcanoes. It's the raw, seething power of the earth interacting. So, what if magic draws from that same energy? In a world like that, mages might deliberately seek out the most tectonically unstable places to live, right along fault lines and above magma chambers, because those areas are brimming with magical potential. Maybe casting spells drains that tectonic energy just a little. Maybe that's how mages keep earthquakes at bay, by using the magic before the earth can shake it loose. You could even have volcanism reduced in areas of a lot of magical activity, because the energy is being siphoned away before it ever reaches the eruption stage. Or you could go elemental with your magic system. Volcanoes are a natural touch point for that kind of system, because they're one of those places where all four classical elements meet. You've got fire from the magma, earth from the crust, potentially water if there's a lake or steam interacting with a caldera, and of course air swirling through the storm systems that often form around volcanic peaks. So, what if the key to unlocking a fifth element in your magic system is being in a volcano? Maybe only there can someone access the raw potential of whatever your fifth element is, be it spirit, or time, or ether, or chaos, whatever fits your world. The volcano then becomes this natural nexus, a place of enormous magical risk and reward. Now, on the rule of cool, one of the more dramatic things you could do is you could give mages the ability to control tectonic forces. But I would caution you to be very careful with that. If mages can cause earthquakes, real ones, and they can shift continental plates, and they can cause mountains to rise up, that has consequences. If one person can just crack open a city by throwing a tantrum, you have to ask, why don't they rule the world? Why haven't they already ruled the world? If magic can do that, you need very strict limits around it. Whether it's rare, unstable, kills the caster, requires massive ritual, something to keep it from breaking your world. That said, a toned-down version could be perfect for a subterranean civilization. Maybe dwarves or deep-dwelling mages can control minor tectonic forces, adjusting faults, stabilizing caverns, or tapping heat from magma flows without triggering quakes. That would make them not just miners and craftsmen, but earth shapers, literally holding up their mountain cities with spells and rituals. And then there's the spiritual side of mountains, which we've touched on, but you can go deeper in fantasy. There's a long tradition in mythology of mountains being closer to the divine. Olympus for the Greeks, the Tower of Babel trying to reach the heavens, sacred peaks that house gods, monasteries, or prophets. So if your world includes magic tied to the divine or prophecy, it makes sense that elevation might matter. Maybe your world's seers can only achieve visions when they climb high enough to see the stars clearly. Maybe the thin air of the upper peaks carries whispers of the future. Maybe proximity to the celestial realm enhances a caster's power or clarity. You could have a prophetic order that lives only on mountaintops, or mages that must ascend for a vision and then descend again bearing what they saw. Height can be a mystical amplifier, The closer you are to the heavens, the stronger your magic, or the weirder it gets. So, whether you're dealing with the raw physical power of the planet or the quiet sacred mysteries of the sky, mountains offer a deep well of magical potential. You just have to make sure it fits your world and your mountain ranges. So whether your mountains rise from crashing plates, bubbling plumes, or a god's forgotten temper tantrum, they're more than just terrain. They're engines of magic, markers of culture, and monumental story beats. And if you can use them right, they can shape everything from your plot to your pantheon. Drop me a comment down below about a mountain range in your world. A very giant thank you to all of my members, especially the just-in-timers at the Build It in Stone level, Lupex Lakeshire, Katie Kofi Mug, Tony Lamana, and our newest member, EP. And of course also to some of my Build It in Wood members, my oldest ones in this case, Carrie, Aya Shamimaru, Tiffany Felix, and Dylan Batera. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that thumbs up button and maybe check out my video on how to create lakes in your world, or whatever the algorithm thinks you'll like next. And I'll see you soon for another episode of Just in Time World Building.